or good morning, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome and good morning or good afternoon, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, good morning, everyone. Let me get my screen all shared, and then I will get the party started. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, today I'm going to be discussing training ourselves younger. We all want to age better. We all want to age healthier. There's the crucial metric of health span versus just lifespan. And I very much, given my profession, given my background, like to focus on the exercise portion of that. I'm also, as mentioned, certified in plant-based nutrition, and I try to stay as abreast of that as I can. But I'm in the trenches in the exercise part. So the predominant portion of our talk today is going to be about exercise, how our body changes, which is not in an even homogeneous way whatsoever. It changes very multifacetedly, and how we can focus on certain things to keep ourselves young, to keep ourselves active, and to keep ourselves healthy so that we can live not just longer, but live more effectively, better, more functionally. Um, and then we'll have a good amount of time at the end for Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, bring them to the end. I'd be happy to hear from you. A little more about me. You guys heard a little bit so far. I'm a bachelor's degree holder in biology, and I'm a certified personal trainer through the American Council on Exercise. I got that way back in 2007. So I've been working as a personal trainer more or less full time for 15 years now. I'm also a two-time natural professional bodybuilder. So I've won a professional bodybuilding card in two different organizations, the World Natural Bodybuilding Organization and the Naturally Fit Federation. And those are drug tested, so that means I'm 100% drug free in terms of performance enhancing drugs. But those are with the general population, so that's competing against omnivores, and I've been a vegan since 2007 as well. So I like to say that's a good credential for veganism right there. It shows you that it has not been a hindrance, and I would argue that it's been an advantage to be on a plant-based diet as a natural bodybuilder. I'm also author or co-author, because my wife is the other author, of our book, The Vegan Muscle and Fitness Guide to Bodybuilding Competitions. That's very much a nuts and bolts how-to manual if you're looking to really learn a lot of details about training and nutrition to get your physique to the next level, whether or not you plan on stepping on stage. It's a very detailed guide that will help you, if you're an in the weeds kind of individual, it will give you a step-by-step program to follow to get your physique to that next level on a plant-based diet. I'm also the owner and the head trainer at Richmond, Virginia's only plant-based gym. We live here in Richmond, Virginia. It's Root Force Personal Training. That's where I just spent the last 8 hours training clients. So forgive me if I'm a little tired. But we are a training gym. So it's a small personal training studio one-on-one. And not all of our clients are vegan, but all of our trainers are vegan. And we do try to um, share as much as we can about the benefits of a plant-based lifestyle with our clients and help everyone take that step to be slightly more plant-based over time. You can find out more about me or what we do on social media at veganmuscleandfitness.com or at our website, veganmuscleandfitness.com. And that's also where you can pick up our ebook if you're so interested. So, what are we going to talk about today? Training ourselves younger is kind of a broad idea. That's one of the reasons a lot of us, especially as we start to get older, exercise and keep an exercise habit. But more specifically, we're going to talk about the different systems of the body, different organizations of tissues, different organizations of organs, and how they age at different rates. It's very nonlinear. It's very much dependent on the type of cells and how we use them, and also very much dependent on our lifestyle. Um, Given that they age at different rates, which of these deteriorate most quickly? It begs the question, okay, so what are we losing the fastest? And the following question from that is, what can we do about it? If we prioritize the muscular or the body systems that we're losing the fastest, it's going to make sense. That's going to make our body as a whole function better for longer. I'm going to list my resources if you care to do any more reading, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. Want to point your eyes towards the picture of myself and my lovely wife there as well, showing that a plant-based diet does work for building muscle in women as well as men, because I think she looks great, and I try to look great too. All right, so when it comes to aging, not all systems of the body are equal. It's not even close, really. It's pretty fascinating if you start to dive into this. So if we were to look at a broad spectrum of what systems, on average, in most individuals will age the most slowly, it's going to be the central nervous system. That's your brain, your spinal cord, etc. Um, and there are a lot of reasons for this, but your brain actually ages very slowly, which is a good thing because it's the top of the list of things I don't want to have suffer from aging. We want our minds to be sharp. We want our minds to be functional, and we want to be able to think clearly as long as possible. So this is good news. But some of the reasons our central nervous system ages so slowly compared to most of the rest of our body, there's two major ones. One is there's a very slow turnover of cells. Our neurons divide and form daughter cells very slowly. And this is a good thing in terms of aging because when there's damage, when there's mistakes, there's more time to repair those mistakes before they're copied. When cells are dividing really, really rapidly and they have a mistake, there's not always a chance to correct that mistake before it is then copied, and all the subsequent daughter cells now have that mistake ingrained into their genetic material. So the slow division rate of the central nervous system is a big advantage in terms of aging. The other one is it's very protected. Our spinal column goes through our vertebrae. Our brain is inside of our skull. So it's very, very protected. Our brain is also behind the blood-brain barrier. So it's protected from a lot of waste metabolites, a lot of hazardous chemicals that might enter our bloodstream. So we keep our brain very safe. It doesn't have a lot of repair to do. So there again is less opportunities for mistakes, less opportunities for damage, stress, wear, and tear. And that means our brain is going to last longer, just like anything else would out in the world. If you take care of it and protect it, it's not going to wear out as quickly. Now, other end of the spectrum, we have our central nervous system ages very, very slowly compared to the rest of our body. The integumentary system, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, I think that's how you say it, our skin, basically the coating of our body, the largest organ in our body, unless you're an in-shape competitive bodybuilder with a lot of lean mass. The integumentary system ages the most rapidly. And the reasons are exactly the same as the central nervous system aging slowly. One is very, very fast cell turnover rate. Our skin is always producing new cells because we're constantly scraping them off, damaging them, whatever. And we constantly have to have a fresh supply of skin cells in order to keep the whole organ functioning and keeping the outside out and the inside in. That's the job of the skin. And so that fast turnover rate means that any damage to the DNA, any mistakes made, can more easily be cemented into our genetic material when the cells divide and form daughter cells. So we have a shorter window in order to repair those damages before they become permanent changes. The other thing is our skin is the opposite of the safe, sheltered brain. If you picture our brain inside this skull with this blood-brain barrier, very, very defended from any sort of damage, our skin is out there. It is the shield. So all day long, UV radiation, scrapes, burns, bruises, frostbite, any kind of dangerous chemicals, chlorine in a swimming pool, you name it, go down the list. Our skin is taking a battering and a bruising all day, every day. So of course it's going to age quickly. And that means that these damages and these genetic shifts can then be cemented into those dividing cells that are dividing so rapidly. However, all this is subject to lifestyle changes. If you pamper your skin, if you make sure not to go out in the sun too much, if you eat a very healthy diet and keep lots of antioxidants in, everything will age more slowly, including your skin. But those are opposite ends of the spectrum. If we look at parts of our body that age very, very slowly, parts of our body that age more quickly, the central nervous system and the skin are opposite ends of that spectrum. The digestive system, if we're looking for something that fell probably right in the middle, it would tend to be the digestive system. Again, it depends on your diet plays a much bigger role in how fast your digestive system aids. But what this all should illustrate to you is that it's not just the numbers on the calendar. It's not whatsoever. Your body is very, very diverse in its cell types and how those cell types exist, metabolize food and excrete waste, and how they interact with the environment. So, when you compare your skin to your brain, they are night and day different. And we shouldn't treat them the same when it comes to how to keep our body running as long as possible and as healthfully as possible. Now, what do we lose the fastest? I just mentioned the integumentary system. Second place only to that, second place only to our skin, is our musculoskeletal system. That, to me, gives me pause because I love muscles. I work with muscles all day, and I want everyone to have muscles. Everyone listening right now, I want you all to have lots of muscles. So hearing that the musculoskeletal system deteriorates that quickly relative to the rest of our body is cause for concern. Uh, the muscle system is absolutely critical for our health, our well-being, and it's what causes us to function. So we need a healthy muscular system in order to function, to stay independent. Otherwise, there is no quality of life. You have to have that. So I will point out later, though, and we'll get to this, the reason for the musculoskeletal system deteriorating that fast is a bit different than other tissues of the body. Largely everything else in the body, it's due to how fast our cells divide and how much wear and tear and abuse they have to endure. Those are the two things that determine the systems of our body's rate of aging relative to everything else. Muscles are a little different, and we'll talk about that. But let's break that down a little further. So we're talking about the musculoskeletal system, our skeletal system, our skeletal muscles, our tendons, our ligaments, and our bones, the things that move us, support us, and keep us structurally sound. These give us physical capacities. If we're thinking muscular endurance, muscular strength, cardiovascular endurance, balance, coordination, all the things like that. What sort of capacities tend to decrease the most quickly over time in this musculoskeletal system? And as you see on this chart to the right, muscle power is far and away the leader of things that degrade quickly over time. If you can see this chart, in just a 3-year change, you're losing 11.3% muscle power relative to muscle mass, which is how much you have, or muscle strength, which is how much force you can produce. And for those that aren't familiar with exercise science terminology, muscle power just means generating force like strength, but quickly. So your ability to accelerate, your ability to jump, your ability to also absorb forces, slow down quickly, change direction quickly, your springiness. Think of that. That's muscle power. And it shouldn't come as any surprise intuitively that that decreases quickly, because you look at a young athlete on like a high school sports team, they have a lot of muscle power. They're springy, they're agile, they're quick, they can jump. And that intuitively is one of the first things that you start to lose as you get older. You don't feel as springy, you don't feel as quick. You don't see a lot of 30 somethings on a playground sprinting around playing tag like you do with children. So muscle power is something that absolutely deteriorates quickly. The second, if we're talking about physical capacities now and not tissues of the body, but the things we are able to do and measure, the second fastest capacity to degrade is balance. So balance, easy way to test that is how long can you stand on one foot? And that goes down markedly after even just our third decade, but especially after our fifth decade, into our 50s and beyond. Balance tends to decrease very rapidly. And that should be a concern. I think a lot of us out there are familiar with the fact that danger from falling is absolutely serious, especially the older you get. When you get above 65, 70 years old, taking a serious fall can have as bad of a lifespan diagnostic as a cancer diagnosis. It's a very bad sign for our long-term health if we are not able to keep our balance and if we are at risk of falling. So balance is the second fastest physical capacity to degrade. Muscle strength comes in third. So muscle strength is a component of muscle power, so they're very much related, but muscle power, I would argue, is more diagnostic and more important. So something you want to look at this chart I kept to the left is muscle power decreasing the most rapidly, and then muscle strength, and then muscle mass. So the three kind of ways, if you want to look about your musculoskeletal system. The two very much correlate with the third. So if your muscle power is decreasing quickly, if your muscle strength is decreasing quickly, you're also going to be the person who loses the most muscle mass. And I would argue balance fits in that as well. So don't look at these as separate. They're all part of that same tide that is lowering or raising all the boats in the harbor, so to speak. And since power is the one that decreases the most rapidly, that's the one we can look at that gives us a good diagnostic of how we are doing for everything else. All right. Talking a little bit more about muscle mass, which is how much muscle we have on our body. We don't lose this evenly either. It's not, equal amount of shoulder or equal amount of muscle loss from my arms and my legs and my trunk as an even layer over time. It very much depends varies based on which muscle we're talking about. So you can see this chart to the right. This is over a 50-year time period, and they average these. And then we're looking at muscles of the arm, trunk, thigh, lower leg. The lower down those gray bars drop, the more muscle was lost per that period of time. between 25 years old and 75 years old. So we can see right away a couple of muscles stand out. In the trunk, the psoas, which is a hip flexor, and in the thigh, the quadricep. We can also look at the lower leg. The one that stands out is the dorsiflexor muscles, like the calf. And if you look on the lower level, it's breaking down some muscles of the leg, the hamstring, the quad, and the lower muscles of the shin. The rectus femoris, by far, 33% loss in that period of time, which is the upper quadricep muscle, which is also a hip flexor, just like the psoas in the trunk. And then the gastrocnemius in the foot has a big drop. But what we're seeing here very clearly is the fastest muscle loss over time occurs in the hips and the thighs compared to all the rest of the body. Now, that should cause a lot of concern because intuitively, we stand on our legs all day. Our hips are the basis of our core. They're the foundation of our core that our trunk, our spine, our shoulders, and everything sits on top of. If those are deteriorating the most rapidly, that's very bad news for our physical function. These are muscles that we require to do everything. They're the foundation of our building. So if we're losing those the fastest, that means we're losing our muscles that are primary movers and stabilizers the fastest, which means our physical function is going to decrease rapidly. And I would say this is not by accident. This is absolutely, there's a reason for this. And we'll go into that a little more, but it should cause you some concern when you see that different rates of muscles like this are decreasing at different rates, or sorry, different muscle groups are decreasing at different rates. It should definitely cause some concern. The flip side of that, though, the nice thing is it gives us areas to focus on. And that's why I like to bring up this whole overarching topic of the body aging at different rates and deteriorating or changing at different rates in different places, is that allows us to focus. It's not just one whole job. We can prioritize things based on, okay, what is going to have the biggest return on investment of our time and what's going to, stave off these age-related changes the longest. So why this discrepancy in muscles? I mentioned there's a reason for this. This chart from the right here is from that same study analyzing changes in muscle loss in different muscle groups over time, but it's looking at the types of muscle fibers within these muscles that we are measuring their change of over that 50-year time period. And in case you're not familiar, there's more than two, but there are roughly two types of muscle fibers in any given muscle. If I were to take my bicep, my chest muscle, my thigh muscle, whatever, you have type 1 type fibers, which are slow twitch. They're better for endurance. They're better for doing lots and lots and lots of repetitions at low load. And there's fast twitch muscle fibers. These are bigger, stronger muscle fibers. They're much better suited to lifting heavy things or, no surprise there, fast contractions, given the name fast twitch. They're better for accelerating explosive movements. Given what we saw above, that power is by far the most rapidly declining physical capacity in our bodies as we age, it shouldn't be that surprising that the muscles that are losing size the fastest over this 50-year period of the study are the ones that have the highest percentage of fast twitch muscle fibers. So if we look in the Y column here going down, this is the change in size. So the muscles that are lower down are losing the most mass over time. And in the X column, that's type 2 muscle fibers. That's the percentage. So the farther right you go, the more of a proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers these muscle groups have. Now down there at the very bottom, if you follow that diagonal trend line to these different points, you see that little circle, that's the quadricep. So those thigh muscles have a lot of fast twitch fibers. They're good for explosive movement, for jumping, for running, things like that. And they are losing muscle the fastest. And we saw that on that previous chart as well. This causes, again, this causes me alarm, but it's also very noteworthy. It's these most athletic, most powerful muscle fiber types are preferentially losing muscle mass over time. And these are all the muscle groups that we saw in that previous slide, the hip flexors, all the hip stabilizer muscles, the quadriceps, the plantar flexors, which are your calf muscles. We're losing a lot of strength, a lot of power, and it's preferentially in these muscles that are fast twitch muscle fibers that give us our springiness, that our explosiveness. But it also, when we lose this, it predicts more muscle loss and loss of function over time. Now, why? Why is this happening? What does this mean? And as I mentioned in our first slide, when I was talking about different systems of the body, like the brain, like the digestive system, like the integumentary system, aging at different rates, there was two major reasons. The first reason was cell turnover rate. How fast are these cells dividing? How quickly are mistakes and damage cemented into our genome in those cells? The other reason was protection, wear and tear. The more wear and tear that a tissue type has to endure, the faster it's then going to age, which is logical. It gets beat up over time. This musculoskeletal system is a little different. And the reason I say that is that it is by far the most adaptive of any system in our body. All of our systems can adapt. When you go outside and you're in the sun every day all summer long, your skin cells produce more melanin to protect them from the extra UV radiation. You get a tan. So it adapts. Likewise, your brain, if you take up a new instrument or if you're a new discipline or you get new job training, at first it's really hard. You don't really know how to do it. You're uncoordinated or awkward or slow. But as you make new connections with your neurons and as you practice and practice and practice and repeat, your brain reorganizes its structure and you get more proficient at those tasks. So all of our body systems adapt, but our musculoskeletal system can dramatically change. If you look at an endurance athlete, someone who runs marathons, compared to a professional Olympic weightlifter, their musculoskeletal system is dramatically different. You could take those individuals and then switch sports, and in 5 years, their bodies would shift towards those new activities, and be dramatically different. Their force production, their proportion of fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers, their bone density, all that would have radical changes. There's no other system in the body that can make that kind of a dynamic change over and over again in any direction you want based on your, regular activity levels. So essentially, the musculoskeletal system is operating on its third capacity when it comes to aging of use it or lose it. And we've all heard this before. This is one of the oldest adages in the world, but it is so absolutely true. More than any other body system, the musculoskeletal system is adaptive. It will change based on the things we regularly do. That means that these fast twitch muscle fibers that we're losing the most quickly in our thighs, in our hips, in our calves, this ability to be springy, to be explosive, to generate forces quickly and absorb forces when we have any kind of impact or have to change direction, they're diminishing rapidly because we don't use them. I mentioned you don't see a lot of people above the age of 30, I would argue of the age of 15, even playing tag on a playground. You never see it. Tag is a great game. You're sprinting, you're changing direction, you're dodging around obstacles. You speed up, you slow down over and over and over again. It's fantastic. And I would argue that kids have this instinct to play games like this because they're building their physical capacities, just like you see animals play. Kittens like to pounce on yarn because they're learning hunting skills. Humans like to play tag, hide and seek, and all this because our bodies know, our instincts know we're building the skills, abilities, and the muscle tissues and the bone density and the neural connections to have a functional body, and to survive in our ecosystem, which is a little different than it used to be, but that's not necessarily part of this discussion. But the reason, if we go back to our list of central nervous system aging the slowest, integumentary system aging the fastest, the reason I would argue that our musculoskeletal system is in second place in terms of aging the fastest is because we become inactive at a young age. Vast majority of us, we get to high school, unless we're an athlete, we're far, far less active than we were at 10, 11, 12 years old. And it only gets worse. We go to college, we go to work, now we're driving for our commutes. We come home, we're exhausted from work, we watch TV. You've heard this before, the story of the modern existence of a sedentary job, long commutes, and no time to exercise at home. Or maybe if you're on top of things, you're exercising an hour or two a week, which is great, but that's not what we were doing as kids when we were playing on the playground every day at recess and at lunch and then at PE and then after school sports. And so, of course, when you look at it that way, we have this very, very, very adaptive system, our musculoskeletal system, which will change itself radically based on the things that we do on a regular basis. And then we stop doing things. Of course, it's going to change. Why wouldn't it? It makes perfect sense when you look at it in that light. The problem is this has serious ramifications for our long-term health. And it's more than just not exercising. We lose that ability to be athletic. We lose that ability to have these high level functions that then predicts we're going to lose all of our muscle mass. We're going to become unstable, have poor balance. We're going to preferentially lose the muscles of our thighs, calves, and hips and become unsteady in our feet. And that's going to really restrict the things we do further. But it doesn't have to be that way. The great thing about having an adaptive system like the musculoskeletal system is you can change the course of that aging trajectory at any time. It's very, very adaptive. And so that works for you. It works on the one hand, if you're not doing anything, it's going to degrade quickly because that's what it does. But on the other hand, if you start doing things, it will adapt and you will improve quickly. So I've not seen any research in this. I looked, but I would love to see some research taking people who really focused on athletic attributes such as muscle power, balance, strength, and saw how their musculoskeletal system ranked in terms of the aging of the rest of the body. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it was right behind the central nervous system. I think it's that powerful that you can have the musculoskeletal system leapfrog most of the other systems in the body and be one of the slowest aging if you use it the way you did when you were 8 years old. That would not surprise me one bit. Now, as an example here, I have, this is not a client, it's not anyone affiliated with, this is at Train with Joan on Instagram. I follow her because she inspires me. Joan's story is she got into weightlifting. She has a bodybuilding daughter and son-in-law, I believe. She got into weightlifting at 70 years old. That's the photo on the left. And she was, on medications, out of shape, had not ever stepped foot in a gym. Picture on the right is 77 years old. So 7 years later, she's a fitness model. She's been on the cover of magazines. She has a big Instagram following if you want to check her out. I find that very inspiring. She posts her workouts and she does serious weightlifting. She's strong. But it all started with her deciding to try at 7 years old something new. And so even with 7 decades of not using her body, with it adapting to a sedentary lifestyle, weak joints, weak bones, weak muscles, even with all that inertia, she was able to become this fit, strong, healthy person. And she's still improving to this day. In fact, it was very, very inspiring. I want to say about 9 months ago, she shared a story about how she likes to cycle and she was in a bicycle accident and she felt pretty badly. She was bruised up. I think she had a black eye, she had a sprained wrist and all that, but she didn't break any bones at 77 years old. I think that is remarkable and fantastic. And she went on to talk about like, if this had happened to me 10 years ago when I was 67, I probably would have shattered multiple bones and been laid up in a hospital and then had poor physical function after that. Probably would have skipped my rehab, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes to show you that not only is she younger and healthier at 77 than she was at 70, but she has a more resilient, safer body so that when she's out being active, having fun with her daughter and son-in-law and whoever else, her friends, even if she gets bumps and bruises, scrapes, it's far less of a serious issue than it would have been were she 10 years younger, but less musculoskeletally fit. So that's the good news is our musculoskeletal system is so adaptive, we can get it to do what we want when we want. Now, this is true at every age. So there's a lot of questions like, but I'm 60, but I'm 70, but I'm 80. Is it too late for me? It's never too late is the answer to that question. So what we see here is this is a great 12-week study. And it looked at, does resistance training work for older adults, age 65 to 75, and for the very old, which is 85 plus in this category. That's how they defined it. Turns out it does. And not only that, but you might look at these numbers. The group in the 85 plus category actually had better results than the group in the 65 to 70 category. They gained more muscle, they gained more strength, and they improved their performance more, almost twice as much in terms of performance than the older adults. Now, I would argue, it's obvious they were probably starting from a little lower place if they were average 85 plus. So they had more to gain back. But this shows how robustly at any age your musculoskeletal system can respond if you give it the right stimulus. There's no sell-by date. There's no deadline where, nope, doesn't work for you anymore. It is always going to work. And honestly, if you're starting from a lower point, it's going to work better. If I'm an elite bodybuilder and I start resistance training and I gain 1%, I'm excited because I'm already at this upper level. I've been doing it for a long time. If someone starts way down here at the very bottom, you can't see my hands, but that's fine. If someone starts way down low in terms of what they're able to do and what they're confident in doing, you're going to see massive improvements. Your body hasn't made those adaptations yet, or if it did a long time ago and lost them, it's going to gain them back. So this tissue, it's really, honestly, it can be miraculous how much you can change your body, how much that can change your life and your prognosis and your physical outcomes based on what you do. And every other system in the body is going to respond to the things you do. Like I mentioned earlier, everything is adaptive, but nothing comes close to this adaptive. And so we can leverage that. We can get to work, and it doesn't take that much. So if you see here, low volume exercise program, 2 to 3 hours a week regarding resistance training is enough to elicit these changes. 12 weeks, 2 to 3 hours a week. These people were much healthier. They bumped themselves into different categories of risk for chronic diseases, for physical function, everything. And what's great as well is structural changes that you make when you resistance train or when you improve your musculoskeletal system. Structural changes that you make persist. They take time to adapt, not a ton of time. 12 weeks is not that long. But there's a follow-up study here where they took people exercising 3 times a week for 12 weeks. And then following that, they had them do a layoff period for 12 weeks, only doing once a week. And they didn't gain any more muscle, but they didn't lose any either. And so what that means is we work hard, we put in time, 3 hours a week, which is not a massive investment. We have 168 hours every week. 3 hours a week, though, you gain a bunch of strength, you gain a bunch of muscle, and you're like, oh no, if I get busy or I get sick or I travel something, this is all going to be for nothing. I'm going to lose it. That's not true. It just takes the slightest amount of regular stimulation for your body to say, no, we better keep this. And that's true of people with bed rest. They've treated people with bed rest as well. A couple hours a week can almost completely prevent the atrophy you would normally see in bed rest, which is rapid, even in the very young. Bed rest can cause rapid muscle loss, but a little bit of resistance exercise, 1 hour, 2 hours a week, can completely negate that. So it does not take a lot. And particularly if you built muscle, built strength, it doesn't take a lot to maintain it. It takes more to build it. You have to do more. You have to stress your body and get it to adapt further. But in terms of maintaining it, it's very easy. It's a minimal commitment, and the benefits are just phenomenal. So there's really no reason not to. You can start at any age. You can benefit at any point. Now, athleticism, and I'm using that as a blanket term, because remember, our physical capacities that deteriorate the fastest are muscle power, balance, and muscle strength. I'm calling that athleticism, even though, you could argue what that term means to different people, like it's like athletic coaches and things. I'm going to call that athleticism. It saves lives. The more physically capable you keep your body or build your body up to be, the less diseases you're going to have, the longer you're going to live. And I would absolutely argue the better your quality of life will be, your health span, because you're going to have better physical performance. The things you can choose to do with your time is open wide. You can do sports, you can do hiking, you can do different kind of adventure things, you can travel. Your body's just more adaptive and resilient and ready for anything. Also, like Joan with her fall on her bike, you can handle setbacks and come back strong much more quickly. So there's just going to be a whole myriad of benefits. Now, some examples of how we could say athleticism saves lives is grip strength. I don't know if you guys listened to my lecture last year, but it was all about how important strength training is for long-term health, for longevity. I mentioned this, grip strength is actually a better predictor of all-cause mortality than blood pressure. Blood pressure is one of the gold standard metrics. Generally, people, as their blood pressure goes up, their risk of all diseases and an early death goes up. But it turns out having a weak grip is even more predictive of that. And the reverse is true too. If you have a strong grip, it predicts that you're going to have a longer, healthier life, which is fascinating to me. And it's not that there's some magic in the hands, or at least not, I don't think so. It's that a strong grip correlates with a stronger, healthier body. People that do things have stronger hands, and therefore they have healthier bodies. Muscle power, as predicted by the sit to stand test. And this test is easy. You measure for 30 seconds. How many times can you sit down in a chair and stand back up? So springier, more powerful muscles will give you a better score on this test. people who score better on this test have a lower predicted fall risk than either walking speed or strength. So I just mentioned how predictive strength is, in this case, grip strength, how predictive it is for mortality risk, and muscle power. And we're talking specifically about falls, but I would argue that, definitely reaches other systems. Muscle power is a better predictor of fall risk than strength or walking speed. So people who walk faster at their normal casual walking speed tend to be healthier than people who have to walk more slowly. And of course, there's limitations there like gait or handicaps, things like that. But by and large, people who walk faster tend to be healthier. But even when you compare walking speed and strength, both of which are excellent metrics for risk of various problems, muscle power was a better predictor. So again, we want to have these powerful, quick, springy, reactive muscles. That's a sign of youth and vigor and health. Single leg balance test. And I mentioned this earlier. This is just stand on one leg, time yourself. How long can you do it? How wobbly are you? How soon do you have to grab something? Strongly correlates with all-cause mortality. And that shouldn't be surprising. If you have strong, stable legs, I mentioned the different rates of muscle loss in our body. If our thighs are strong, if our hip stabilizers and flexors are strong, it's going to be a piece of cake to balance. If these things are weak because we've been sedentary, it's not going to be so easy, especially if we're carrying a lot of extra weight. It's going to be very challenging. And that's going to predict that we're not doing so well in terms of long-term health. So athleticism, if we're talking about strength, muscle power, and balance, when I say athleticism, absolutely saves lives. Work on these things, improve these test scores, and keep your body healthy. You will live longer. You will be healthier. Now, I've talked a lot about muscle power. I've talked a lot about athleticism, balance, the musculoskeletal system in general. How do we improve it? It's really important. I made that point. You get it. How do we improve power in particular? Now, granted, all these things help everything else. If your balance gets better, it's going to be easier to have good muscle power. If your strength gets better, you're going to have more power and more muscle mass. So these things feed into each other. But right here, I'm mostly focusing on muscle power because that was the most rapidly lost physical capacity that people saw over time. And it's very diagnostic of everything else going poorly if you lose it. So there are 4 ways that I'd say anyone can easily focus more on their muscle power. Remember, muscle power is force plus speed, force generated quickly. So if you have a traditional strength training regimen, let's say you go down to the YMCA twice a week and you do the machine circuit where you lift weights on the machines, that's awesome. Please keep doing that. That's really good for your health. The only change you have to make in order to make it more power focused is accelerate on the concentric phase. So when you're lifting the weight, try and accelerate the weight, speed it up. Be safe. Don't go necessarily your full speed, especially if you're just starting out, especially if you're an older adult or you have some sort of at-risk situation like, surgery, injuries, chronic conditions. But work on accelerating that weight. Don't just lift it smoothly. Try and make it speed up as you go. If you go through a few workouts and you have no problems, work towards accelerating as hard as you can, maybe over a 4 to 6 week period. Get to that point where you're doing the same weight, but you're doing it faster. Now for the eccentric, this is the lowering portion of the weight, could be machine, could be free weight, doesn't matter. Definitely do that slow and controlled. The eccentric is very, very beneficial for stability, for improving neural connections with your muscle spindles and your muscle cells. That's where your brain talks to your muscles. That makes that connection better. So you get more coordinated, you get more control. So you want to be thoughtful. You want to keep tension on the muscles for that lowering phase. And what I make all my clients do in the gym, what I just did for 7 hours now, is I have a mandatory pause at the bottom of every rep. So that ensures that we're not bouncing. We're not using any kind of tendon ligament slack to bounce that weight back up. We're pausing, we're controlling it, and then we're using pure muscle strength to accelerate that resistance back up. Again, this works for body weight. This works for if you were doing push-ups or lunges. You can also go down slow, pause, and accelerate on the upstroke. It works no matter what. So you can easily integrate it into any strength training you're already doing that way. Option number 2 for improving power and improving this athleticism is accommodating resistance. Accommodating resistance is just fancy fitness speak for the weight is not the same the whole way. It changes as you go. So typically that's done with resistance bands or chains. If you have like a more hardcore weightlifting gym, there's chains. I wish they were everywhere because they're pretty cool. But if you think about, if I have a bar and instead of weights on each side of the bar, I have resistance bands attached to the bar and I'm lifting it up and the bands are getting stretched as I lift it. The farther I stretch that band, those bands, the more resistance they are pulling down on that bar with. So instead of it being 10 pounds at the bottom and 10 pounds at the top, it might be half that at the bottom, maybe 5 pounds, but it could be 15 or 20 pounds at the top because I've stretched that band so much further. That, from your muscles perspective, mimics acceleration. So instead of just having 10 pounds of force all the way up as you're lifting that weight, the muscle has to push harder and harder and harder to get that weight to keep going up. And that's what it's doing when it's accelerating. It's pushing harder and harder to get weights to speed up. So you can take a normal resistance and you can accelerate hard, or you can use accommodating resistance. And I would argue still try to accelerate it. But your muscles see that the same. When they have to produce more and more force during a repetition, that to them means acceleration. Chains work the same way. I don't know, vast majority of people will not have access to chains. It's honestly, it's just a metal chain you hang from a weight. And it's the same idea. As you lift the weight, more and more links of the chain are pulled up off the ground. The weight gets heavier. As you lower the weight, more and more chain lays down on the ground. The weight gets lighter. So same exact idea. You're forcing your muscle to work harder the higher you lift the weight, and your muscle thinks it's accelerating because of that increased force demand. So accommodating resistance is great. I think everyone should use it. Plyometrics and rebounders. So plyometrics are not for everyone. I will absolutely say that if you're an at-risk population, if you have concerns of falling, things like that, you don't need to be jumping and bouncing around. Most people well into their 70s or even 80s can do some form of plyometrics though. So if you picture a box jump onto a very low box. If you go to exercise classes where you have the plyometric steps, where you have risers and you put that plastic lid on top for a step, you just put that lid on the ground, it's 2 or 3 inches high, and you jump onto that. There are a lot of people that can do that, especially if you have it next to a wall with someone ready to assist you if you lose your balance. You can do that, and you'll be amazed at what a confidence booster that is. I've routinely seen this, and I've even seen this in myself. If I haven't done any plyometrics for, say, a couple years, it's intimidating. Even jumping on something low, it's like, I haven't left the ground. I haven't left Earth's orbit in a long time. This is nerve-wracking. But then you do it and you're like, oh, I can still do this. And it absolutely is a confidence booster. I've seen it in many clients over time. You do a little bit of jumping and all of a sudden you realize you can. And that makes you more confident, puts a little spring in your step. And it also is teaching your body to be more reactive. And that's the whole point of plyometrics, is they're quick. So you step wrong off a curb, you have this system where you can more easily catch yourself because you're used to these quick movements, these accelerations, these absorbing of impacts, which is part of muscle power. The other tool I absolutely love, and I encourage everyone to use them when they can, is rebounders. Rebounders are just small trampolines. That's why I have this little image of that guy jumping there. Trampolines are fantastic for a lot of things. You're getting the acceleration of jumping, so that's a power. You're also getting the G-forces of landing, but it's not a hard impact. It's a slow kind of cushioned impact. So you're getting lots of G-forces, and that's improving your force absorption, which is another component of muscle power. If you're not holding on, and by all means, if you haven't been on a rebound or anything in 10 years, 20 years, whatever, hold on, be safe. But if you are comfortable or have been practicing and you can do a trampoline without holding on, it's fantastic for your balance, because the trampoline is not just pushing you straight up. It's also, depending on where you land, it might be pushing you slightly to the left, slightly to the right. You might be landing more on your right foot than your left foot. There's all these minor perturbations that your body has to absorb and manage that are very, very beneficial for your balance. So rebounders are great for power. They're great for force absorption. They're great for balance and coordination. I've even seen research out of NASA. They've used them on the space station to maintain bone mass density. If you strap someone to a band harness and have them jump on a trampoline, it's stimulating bone mineral density. So they're very good for that too, because of those G forces with the impact. So there's a lot of benefits to plyometrics and rebounders. And I saw a study recently that it was very short intervals. It was 100 jumps 5 times a week. So 100 jumps, I don't know what that takes you, maybe 45 seconds, a minute, something. 5 times a week over a period of 6 weeks. And people had marked measurable improvement of their VO2 max, which is your cardiovascular fitness. They had improvement of their muscle power. They had improvement of their jump height, their vertical height. So I wouldn't say there's anything particularly magic about rebounders and trampoline, but they are a very useful tool that works a lot of different things at once. So I absolutely encourage you, if you're doing that machine circuit at the Y, like I mentioned above, throw a little rebounder in there. Make sure you're safe. Make sure you got a spotter at first if you're not sure. But build up these capacities because it has a lot of carryover. Um, there's also, and you see the citation here, there's a study I read, power focused resistance training, which is integrating these things, as I mentioned. Oh, I forgot to mention balance. Um, balance work, very, very important. As I mentioned, in terms of physical capacities, it's the second fastest physical capacity that we lose over time. Second to muscle power is balance. The good news is it's very easy to build your balance. You just have to spend time balancing. Um, at first, especially if your balance has suffered from neglect for a long time, just work on standing on one foot. Stay somewhere where you can hold on to things, stay somewhere safe, and just work on 30 seconds per leg is typically where I start people. I make sure to do these barefoot because I want all the muscles in your feet engaging. I want your toes spread out and kind of catching you like stabilizers. I want your arch having to pop up and work because your feet and your ankles are a quarter of the joints in your body. You want them strong, you want them functional. But just start 30 seconds per leg, holding on. If 30 seconds is too much, start with 15. Start where you are. And then as you improve, the way I like to integrate balance work with all my clients is anytime we're doing some kind of smaller single joint exercise, like say dumbbell curls for your biceps, also have them do it on one leg, or lateral raises for your shoulders. Anything like that, or resting between sets. Let's say you're doing some sets of leg press on the leg press machine and you're resting a minute or two. Do 30 seconds on each leg of balancing in between that. It's going to be harder because your legs are tired, but that doesn't bother me. Hard is actually okay. Hard is good for you. But you start to build that up and make sure you're hitting balance regularly. It's a skill, just like playing an instrument or something, and regular routine repetitions of balance practice make it improve really, really quickly. So make sure you're getting that almost every day, or at least every time you exercise, if you're formally exercising, get that in and find ways to integrate it. Stand on one foot while you're brushing your teeth, stand on one foot, you're waiting in line. Very simple ways to do that. And it improves quickly, and that's going to also improve all your other capacities as well, because better balance means you can generate more force, more muscle power, maintain more muscle mass. And so all these things feed into each other, as I mentioned before. And as I was saying before I got to that point and had to backtrack a second, is power focused resistance training, which is using just the first method of acceleration on the concentric phase, proved effective in older adults. It was safe and effective. There was no higher injury risk than regular strength training with a steady pace. It was just as effective for improving muscle mass and power, and it improved physical function more than traditional training. And they were measuring balance, standing on one foot, and the sit to stand test, where how fast can you get out of a chair. So people gained just as much strength, just as much muscle mass. It was just as safe, but they improved their function a little bit better. To me, that's a huge win. That argues that everyone should be doing this as a default right there until we know better. But at the very least, it means you should start looking about, first of all, everyone needs to be strength training. But when you're strength training, think about a little bit of acceleration, get it in there. Occasionally use some accommodating resistance, use some bands or some chains. Do some of your cardio workouts on a rebounder. Occasionally stand on one foot. These are all going to have really profound benefits for your body. And they're pretty easy to integrate. You don't have to do anything more than you already were doing if you were doing some resistance training. And if you're going to start some resistance training anyway, these are just techniques that are shifting the way you're doing it. It's not anything extra you have to do, and it will absolutely pay dividends. Now, plant-based nutrition. Like I said, this talk is primarily focusing on exercise. That's my specialty. That's my 9 to 5. That's where I feel like I have a lot of information to bring that some of these other esteemed speakers might not have. But plant-based nutrition absolutely plays a vital role in keeping our body aging slowly, keeping it functional and performing at a high level as long as possible. So I found a few studies, and there are many, but there are a few studies here that are specific to muscle mass, physical performance that I wanted to share with you guys. Plant-based diet improves athletic performance and is cardioprotective. That was actually Neil Barnard from PCRM was involved in that study. And so it absolutely makes sense to me as a plant-based athlete. since 2007. It absolutely makes sense. You feel better, you perform better, you recover faster, you have better circulation, you're getting more micronutrients, you're getting less of the bad stuff, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, et cetera, et cetera. So that is no surprise to me. Plant-based diets are associated with improved physical function in older adults. That, for similar reasons, makes perfect sense to me, but that might be shocking to some people. Some people think you need to eat your meat to stay strong. I think more and more over time, we're seeing that is not the case, and actually the opposite is the case. If you have your body aging more slowly because you're taking in antioxidants, you're taking in polyphenols, you're getting enough fiber in your diet, you're getting enough water in your diet, you're not taking in all these artery clogging things, and so you have better circulation. It makes sense that your body would age more slowly, would repair itself better, and that would translate to, over decades, better physical function. That is not any stretch of imagination for me. And hopefully it's not for you either, because it makes perfect sense. Plant protein builds just as much muscle as animal protein. This is a study, again, I shared with my discussion last year on strength training. If you take two groups, put them on resistance training programs, and make them eat just as much protein as the other, but one group is only eating plant-based protein, whole foods as well as protein supplement shakes, and the other group is only eating predominantly animal protein, the way most standard American diets eat, they're going to build just as much muscle. If you have the same workouts and the same amount of protein, plant protein builds just as much muscle, which is great. That means there's no reason to focus on that animal protein, even if you were to make the argument that it's going to work better. The research says it doesn't. It works just as well. And the plant protein has a whole host of other benefits. So there's really no ground for that animal protein to stand on. Higher plant protein intake was associated with reduced age-related muscle loss. And that's the chart I have over here on the right. This is looking at overall protein. You can see there's the light green is total protein. The dark green is vegetable-based protein, which I would argue just indicates how many total plants they were eating. This shows that older populations, I believe this is older populations in a home in Taiwan, I want to say. I need to go back and look. But bottom line, older adults, and they were looking at compare older adults who are eating more protein to those eating less protein, or how much protein they're eating per day. Who has more muscle mass, who's at more risk for low muscle mass, and then also do that same thing with plant protein in particular. So shouldn't be any surprise, people eating more protein had more muscle mass. We're at much lower risk of losing muscle mass. And that was even more pronounced for the plant protein. People eating more plants, I would argue, not just the protein, experienced less muscle loss or a lower risk of muscle loss. And if you see at the bottom right, the purple bars, the vegetable protein density for the different quartiles of muscle loss risk, which they put in an index, each one of those numbers is higher than the counterpart for total protein, which is in the red. So the numbers are very similar, 7.61 compared to 7.47, for example. But plant protein actually did a little better than protein in general, which also doesn't surprise me. If the protein is just as good, but plants overall are much more nutritious, then it makes sense that people are going to do better when they're eating more plants. The last study I have listed here is substituting animal protein for plant protein significantly reduces all-cause mortality risk. And I believe this one is from the Harvard Nurses Health Study, which is a massive study, tons of participants for decades. And it showed one of the most protective things that someone could do in their diet was eat plant protein, which again, I take as a marker for total plant intake, not for, pea protein shakes per se. And for every unit of plant protein that someone ate in this study instead of animal-based protein, they saw boosts to their, mortality risk. They were less likely to die from everything. Every time they ate a little less animal protein, a little more plant protein. So if we're looking at this research as a whole, if plant-based protein is just as good at building muscle, but plant-based diets are fueling your performance, improving function as you're older, and decreasing your risk of all-cause mortality, why wouldn't you focus your diet on whole plant foods and plant proteins in particular, like beans? I tell my clients all day long till I'm blue in the face, go eat beans today. Beans, 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 beans. Yes, there are other sources of plant proteins, but that's an easy little soundbite I can give them. Make sure you get your beans in today. There's lots of great things about beans. So there's tons more information regarding plant-based nutrition. Lots of the speakers in this summit are sharing much more than I could about plant-based nutrition. But just this snapshot, just this little snapshot of, okay, how does plant proteins affect physical function as you age? How does it affect muscle mass? We can clearly see an advantage. So it should be the default until we know otherwise. It should absolutely be like, this is the way to age healthily. And I hope over time we see more and more of that in general media. And I think we are. All right, so going back to power training recommendations, I gave you 4 tips for improving your athleticism, which is, accelerate your weights, use accommodating resistance, use a trampoline, rebound, or do plyometrics, and integrate some balance things. But backing up a little bit, let's do some more general resistance training or, power focused resistance training recommendations here. So exercises, what exercise are we looking for? It can be anything. As long as you're using resistance for your muscles, it can be whatever you like. Remember, muscle tissue is adaptive. It doesn't really care what sort of external tool you're using. As long as you're making it generate force, it will adapt. So you can use body weight, free weight machines. You can be lower body focused because remember, our thighs, hips, and calves lose muscle the fastest. So you do want to make sure you're working those. Do not skip leg day. Intensity, and that's percentage of 1 rep max or rate of perceived exertion. If you don't know these things, don't worry about it. Essentially, it means work hard. 20 to 80% of 1 rep max means you can use lightweight or heavyweight as long as you're pushing yourself. If you use a lightweight and stop when it's still easy, it's not going to have that much of an effect. So if you're using a lighter weight, it just means you have to do more repetitions until it gets hard. Because what your muscle is waiting for is how much hard work have you been doing? Okay, I better adapt. That's what our muscles are listening for, paying attention to. Rate of perceived exertion is 13 to 18 out of 20. I would have called that a 6 to 9 out of 10. I think that's a little more intuitive. Rate of perceived exertion is just on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard did that feel? And we're looking for 6 to 9. We're looking for pretty tough. Not absolutely all you could do, not muscle failure, but pretty tough. Frequency, we're looking for 2 to 3 times a week. As I mentioned, it only takes a couple of hours. In terms of time commitment, resistance training, power training, athletic training, whatever you want to call this, is very, very easy to fit in. We all have 168 hours every week. 2 hours is, it's very small commitment to there. It's almost 1%. We can all get that in, and the benefits are so profound that there's no reason we shouldn't get that in. Sets and repetitions per exercise, I would say make sure you're getting at least 5, 6 exercises that work all the muscle groups of the body. And we want to do 1 to 3 sets. Repetitions, again, don't really matter. So you can say 6 to 12 repetitions. I think using a little bit more resistance and really accelerating has a little bit better benefit on power in particular if we're talking about it. But if you're new to this, if you want to make sure you're safe, absolutely err on the higher end of the rep range. You could do sets of 20 repetitions, 25. The main thing is get started. I think there is benefit to doing the heavier weights once in a while, especially as you get more acclimated and really working that acceleration. But the bottom line is get in there and do the thing. Rest periods. Typically, longer rest periods are beneficial for power. When we're trying to accelerate a rate, when we're being a little more explosive and intentional with our exercises, it's not just fatiguing your heart and lungs. It's not just fatiguing your muscles. It's actually fatiguing your nervous system as well. When your brain has to send a very strong signal for all your muscles to contract as hard as they can all at the same time in a coordinated fashion, that's more work for it than to just go, yeah, lift it slow and easy, no big deal. And so a little bit longer rest intervals can be beneficial here. Now, granted, most of us listening to this are not Olympic athletes. It doesn't matter all that much. But if you're pushing yourself, if you're on that 8 or 9 out of 10 scale rate of perceived exertion, and you're using some challenging weight, by all means, give yourselves 3 or 4 minutes. You don't have to go at 1 or 2 if you need a little more rest. I would say if your repetitions are noticeably slower, then you probably should have rested a little longer. The point here is to teach your muscles to be faster on that concentric. So give them enough time that they can do a good job, because it's the quality, not just the quantity. In addition to that, rest about 48 hours between sessions. If you're doing 2 to 3 sessions a week, don't do them on Monday and Tuesday. Do them on Monday and Thursday or Friday. That will space things out. That will give your body a chance to recover and adapt and become stronger. It's not the work that makes us stronger. It's adapting to the work, and that takes time. So give your body time to adapt. All right, safety considerations. Always consult with your doctor before starting an exercise program. Um, it's just a good idea, especially if you're any at-risk population, if you have any kind of history of surgeries or on any, medications, if you have any sort of chronic conditions, please consult your doctor, get the okay, make sure it's safe, because the whole point of what we're doing here is to live longer and healthier. And going in and getting hurt or damaging your body is counterproductive to that goal. Uh, Technique is extremely important. I'm mentioning all the things here that I want you to do in terms of controlling on the downstroke, in terms of accelerating up, but being safe and making sure you're selecting exercises that work your whole body. If you don't know what any of that means, or if that's all confusing and stressful to you, hire a trainer. I own a personal training gym. I'm biased, but I absolutely think everyone could benefit from using a trainer. Get someone who's certified by a national governing body like American Council on Exercise that I'm certified with, and who has experience with clients like you. Vet them a little bit, make sure they know what they're talking about. But they will absolutely shorten your learning curve substantially. They will show you the ins and outs. They will make sure you're doing it. And the days that you just don't feel like being there, a trainer's job is to get you there and make sure you do it anyway. Because the number one metric that is going to spell success is consistency. If you show up and do the thing, it's going to work. Now, when you speak with your doctor, review any medications or contraindications that you may have, just to make sure everything's safe or there's not specific things that you need to watch out for. If you've herniated a disc in your neck and you can't lie down on a bench press, you need to talk to your doctor about that before you go down and lie down on a bench press at the gym. If you, like, say, for example, you've had bypass surgery or you're at high risk for a heart attack, do you need to limit your heart rate in the gym? Do you need to limit your blood pressure during exercises? Do you need to have some kind of monitoring equipment? These are things you want to talk to your doctor about if you're at a high risk population. It does not mean you cannot do it. You absolutely can get in there and improve and get stronger and healthier and better. But you need to be smart about it. Take care, ask the right questions, and take the right precautions so that you can maximize your chance of success. All right. So in a nutshell, that's what I was talking. These are references. These are some of the studies I cited in my lecture. And then I'd like to go to any questions. That's my beautiful family. We now have a third child, and these kids are a lot bigger. So I need an updated muscle photo with the kids. I'll get that to you guys someday. So let me know what questions you have.
All right, great. Well, we look forward to that updated picture of the family, but it looks like everyone is pretty physically fit there. So thank you so much for all that information that you shared. We're now going to begin the formal Q&A portion of the presentation. For our audience members who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand in Zoom. We'll put instructions for how to do so in the chat. We don't take questions directly from the chat, so if you do want to ask a question, please raise your hand. So we had a speaker yesterday that seemed to say that it was very hard to put on a lot of muscle. And this is someone who's extremely pro plant-based, but he was saying that it's very hard to put on a lot of muscle without doing so in an unhealthy way. And when I pointed out game changers, he said that, like the guy who's the strongest man, who's a vegan, was fat, and or we have to do unhealthy things. Can you put on muscle, I guess, whether you're vegan or plant-based or not? Can you put it on in a healthy way? I know you mentioned the proteins, that as long as you eat the same amount of protein, you can do so. But do you have to eat an unhealthy proportion of your diet in protein? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on protein in particular have changed a lot over the years. When I first started bodybuilding seriously in about 2009, the dogma was to eat as much protein as you possibly could, and I did. And I've since backed off a lot on that, especially with emerging longevity research, because longevity has become much more of a hot topic in the last few years, saying that tons and tons of protein is probably not a good idea if you want to live a long time. We need more information on that, but that seems to be where the consensus is leaning. Can everyone gain muscle on a plant-based diet? Absolutely. Absolutely you can. You hear the whole adage, how did an elephant get so big if it never ate meat? So it's absolutely true that you can gain muscle mass. Granted, we're not elephants, but as long as you're hitting adequate calories, maybe a slight surplus, and you're getting adequate protein, which I'll talk a little bit more about protein in a second. As long as you're hitting those two things and stimulating muscle protein synthesis with some hard exercise. So you got to put in hard work and you've got to do it in a thoughtful way where you're working on the muscle systems of the body. There's no reason you shouldn't gain muscle mass. There's a very big genetic component to getting muscular. In bodybuilding, we talk about genetics all the time because you can take you can take two people and put them on the same workout, same diet. One will get very muscular, one will gain a tiny bit. And that is largely genetically dictated. I tend to be at one end of the spectrum where I gain muscle pretty easily. I've met people who gain muscle faster than me, and that made me mad. But there are also people who they can do everything perfect and they will absolutely gain strength. They will gain muscle, but it will be, 10% of what an easy responder would have. There's actually that term in the literature, a fast responder, slow responder, but there are no responders. Everyone responds. Going back to protein a little bit, because I'm glad you asked. That's something that a lot of people are interested in. The minimum daily requirement for protein for everyone is 45 grams a day for females, 55 grams a day for males. So that's how much you want to make sure you're getting every day to stay alive. That's very, very easy to do if you're eating adequate calories. So if you're not starving to death, you're hitting your protein. Now, in terms of the literature, and again, this is a moving target and a pretty hot debate, muscle mass in response to exercise is maximized at about 1.7 grams per kilogram body weight per day, which if you translate that to pounds, it's about 3/4 of a gram of protein per pound of body weight every day. So if you weigh 200 pounds, that's 150 grams of protein a day. So that's the upper threshold. Like, let's say we're talking about a male, that's 55 grams a day is the bottom of what you want to consume. And then if you weigh 200 pounds, and I'm just throwing that out there, about 150 grams a day is the top. That's a pretty wide thing. That's a 100-gram swing. So I would absolutely argue if you're eating plant-based foods, if you're getting closer to that higher number, like let's say you're eating 100, 110 grams a day, and you're doing some resistance training, there's no reason you shouldn't gain muscle mass. Hitting higher protein number is harder to do, especially if you're only having whole foods, if you're not having any mock meat, if you're not having any protein powder, it's more challenging. You have to focus more on your tofu, your tempeh, your beans, your nuts and seeds. But it's certainly achievable. I've done it. And you can still build muscle at lower protein intakes. I've worked with people who were largely fruitarian or largely raw vegan and had very low protein intakes. They still gained muscle and still gained strength. It probably wasn't maximized, but it's certainly possible. Even at the lowest, I would not be surprised one bit if at the very bare minimum of 55 grams a day, you could gain muscle protein, gain strength. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. What about though at the level of performing as a bodybuilder? Not that I don't think many of our audience are going to become professional bodybuilders, but the idea of, are those people, even in the whole food plant-based people, are they healthy, or are they doing something that is, in order to put on that muscle, they're doing something that may be unhealthy for them in the long term?
That's a great question. I honestly ponder this question myself a lot, and I've read a bit about it trying to find an answer. I will say for long-term health, if your goal is just to live as long as you possibly can, avoid diseases, it's probably best to keep a low BMI, a low body mass index, a lightweight. If you think about it, your heart does not have to pump as much blood when you have a smaller body. It doesn't have as far to go. There's miles and miles and miles of extra vascular tissue for every pound of muscle you put on. Tons of capillaries. Same thing with all your systems of your body. Your liver, your kidneys have less filtration to do when you have a smaller body, when you're not eating as much food. So it's logically makes sense to me that if your goal is absolutely just longevity, you'd want to have a lower food intake. You'd want to have a lower body mass index. You'd want to stay pretty lean. And the protein would fit into that too. I would say probably lower protein. And the research tends to support that, but not always, because muscle mass is important for healthy aging too. And I discussed that in my talk. People who have less muscle mass tend to not do as well as they get older. Are the people who are in the whole food plant-based community who are carrying more muscle mass being unhealthy? I would say no. I would say they are being healthy because, and again, there's lots of uncertainty in my language here on purpose. I would say they are being healthy because they're engaging in resistance training exercise. Hopefully they're doing some sort of power, and they're keeping their body in really good physical function. They're getting highly nutritious whole plant foods to fuel their body. So they're choosing absolutely the healthiest source of protein they can to create those changes. And I think, especially as you get older, muscle mass is very protective of many, many chronic diseases. So of course, there's going to be a tipping point where you're just trying to get massively huge and it's just stressful on your body. But having a strong, healthy body, having that grip strength, having better balance, better muscle power is correlated with living longer and having less problems. So, I think if you're not going to this point where you're just piling on muscle mass, I think it is absolutely a healthy thing for your long-term health.
And we had a speaker on the other day, and she was actually a trainer, and then she got into nutrition. She became a nutritionist, and she was saying that she would recommend that her clients would stop or minimize their exercising, specifically when they were trying to lose weight, because exercise inhibited weight loss. And then after, as they lost weight, then she would reintroduce exercise. What is your experience with that? That seemed new to me, at the very least.
If it works for someone, I'm not going to bash it. So weight loss is complex. Our, existing the way we do in the world where there's constantly addictive food, we're constantly bombarded by advertisements. The cheapest foods are often the least healthy. We have a lot of things working against us that makes weight loss very challenging for a lot of people. So I don't want to necessarily, discredit something that's working for people. If she finds that her clients do really well just focusing, like taking the mental burden off of having to exercise and just focusing on food, I think that's amazing. In my experience, that is not the case. In my experience, exercise is absolutely helpful. And it tends to have a snowball effect that if you just got a great workout in, you're less likely to go home and eat a pizza. You feel good, you're motivated, you have all these endorphins flowing, you're like, let's get a salad, let's have a smoothie, let's go. Versus if you've been a couch potato, if you've been sitting home watching movies all day, it's very easy to just be like, I'm going to have, whatever junk. I'm feeling lazy. I'm feeling tired. So I find that good habits absolutely tend to feed into each other and go in clusters. And the same thing is true of bad habits. Um, you know, you can derail yourself with one bad thing and that leads to many other bad habits. So in my experience, exercise and particularly resistance training is very, very beneficial for weight loss and improving your body composition.
Great, thanks. And what is the role, and I don't know how much you discussed this in your presentation, what's the role of flexibility in health as we age? We've had a few speakers actually that showed the same exact picture of this, like she seemed like she was a 100-year-old woman with her leg up on a street sign, showing how, and then talking about how important flexibility was as we age. What's your experience with the loss of flexibility as we age and its importance?
That's a great question. I've actually somewhat changed camps. If you would have talked to me 5, 6 years ago, I would have absolutely said flexibility is one of the most important things you can focus on with your fitness. And it is. We tend to lose range of motion over time at a measurable rate. When I've worked on flexibility with my clients and they've improved it, every single time they always say, I feel younger. They use the word younger. So there's something in our mind that when we have freedom of movement, we associate that with youth. Um, so in terms of the literature, in terms of long-term health, I don't know a ton. The things I've read show that flexibility and stretching are quite beneficial. But I also worry about it as an injury risk thing. So I know that what I'm doing with this resistance training, with improving people's performance, with improving people's body composition is very, very beneficial. I also know there's more than one study out showing that if you're doing resistance training and you're using a good range of motion, it's just as effective at improving flexibility as stretching is. So, if I take a weight and I squat all the way down and all the way up, I just bent my knees a lot, my ankles a lot, my hips a lot. Just like if I had grabbed my foot and bent my knees and ankles and hips a lot. So in that way, it's sort of the vegan equivalent of two birds, one stone, whatever that phrasing would be.
Mhm.
So you absolutely can improve your flexibility just with strength training. But I prefer dynamic stuff. Now, when I have my clients work on mobility, I'm doing arm circles, arm swings, leg kicks, hip circles, rather than reach and hold. Because I worry about people losing stability and then carrying that less stability into their strength training and possibly increasing their risk of injury.
Okay, so mobility as opposed to specific flexibility is what I'm
Yes.
hearing. Is that okay?
Hmm.
Has a nice ring to it. Um,
Yes.
what do people get wrong, specifically when they're getting started, right? A lot of people come to, you had that example of that the one woman who got into getting fit at 70. What do people get wrong? What are the dangers when people are getting started, and what should we keep in mind in order to make sure that we don't injure ourselves as we're beginning our health journey, specifically with physical fitness at an advanced age?
Yes. Another great question. You're doing great with those. Uh, I would say almost every time what people get wrong is they do too much too soon. So let's say your body is acclimated to working a desk job, driving home, sitting at the dinner table, lying down in bed. There's no strenuous movement anywhere in that routine. Your body is adapted to zero strenuous movement, which means that adding any strenuous movement at all is going to cause it'll change. It'll elicit a positive response. Doesn't mean you have to throw the kitchen sink at it. You don't have to do, the latest P90X workout or go to Orange Theory or whatever the thing is and do a brutal workout. That's completely unnecessary. Your body will respond to a nudge at that point because it's down low. So a nudge is all you need to do. What I like to use terminology wise, like to use the analogy of pharmaceutical company. They look at a minimum effective dose when administering a drug. It's not how much can I give you, it's what's the least of a dosage I can give you to elicit the desired response. Look at exercise the same way. What's the least amount of exercise you can do when starting out to get your body to change, to nudge it? And then as your body adapts, it's now acclimated to that, nudge it a little bit more. That way you have all this room to grow. It's less daunting to begin, and you're far, far less likely to injure yourself or burn out. So um, I think that's a big one. And plant-based nutrition, which I'm not sure that was what your question about, one of the biggest things I see over and over again is under eating. People start eating a whole food plant-based diet. They don't realize how filling the food is and how, you know, calorie diffuse it is compared to their previous diet. And they end up drastically cutting their calories and they feel tired and they're like, I feel too tired on this diet. I must be missing a nutrient. It's like, no, you're under eating. So if it's about switching to a whole food plant-based diet, eat a lot, eat big portions, make sure you're eating your starches, make sure you're getting some healthy fats, nuts, seeds, avocados, things like that, so that you're getting adequate calories. And that's a pitfall I commonly see.
Great, thank you. And one of the most common problems, really with any healthy endeavor or deviation from people's normal pattern, is stick-to-itiveness. What have you found is most successful with your clients in getting them to stick to this new journey for them for health?
Great question. I would say that it's two things. One is community. Community is absolutely big. Community is a big part of healthy aging in general. Loneliness is as deadly for us as smoking. So you have to have a community. You have to have people with like interests. What we do, even though our gym is one-on-one, it's just me and a client or another trainer and a client in there. They don't have a sense of who else is coming in. We have a board, a wall of fame. So everyone's best lifts, everyone's, recent exercises, everyone's recent assessments are written up there. And a lot of them know each other. A lot of them, have been coming to see me for years. And so, oh, they say, what is Bill doing? Or what is Susan doing? And they, oh, someone got a new squat record. I got to up my record too. And that builds this sense of community, even though they're not in the gym together. If you just go to the gym, say hi to people, take your earbuds out. The earbuds drive me crazy. I wish people would make eye contact and speak to each other. But it's important. That motivates you. When you see the same person every day and you see them get in shape, you want to get in shape. You learn from each other. You see them doing a new exercise. That's a really big one. The other one is progress, measuring your progress. If you're not just going in there with no plan and never assessing how you're doing, you're much more likely to continue doing it. So don't just go in and lift, 50 pounds on the bench press every week for the rest of your life. Go in and try and get a little stronger. Have goals, even if they're tiny goals, especially if they're tiny goals, because those aren't intimidating, but they motivate you. If you're trying to get down one belt size, celebrate when you get down one belt size. Tell your friends. Get these little victories, have these little goals, measure your progress, because that's what's going to keep you going day in and day out and day in and day out. Not some vague idea of, I know I need to do this because it's good for me. It's like, hey, this is working. I'm going to try this now. And then I'm going to try this. And then you inspire others as well, and that feeds into the community.
And in your opinion, is that why gyms that like Orange Theory and CrossFit tend to be so addictive to people as the community aspect of it?
100%. I think that's fundamental to a successful fitness enterprise. And I think that's as time goes by, I think that's missing more and more in other aspects of our lives. We're working remotely. You go to schools or you go to gyms, like I mentioned, and people have their earbuds in, they're looking at their phone. We're completely cut off all the time. So if you go somewhere where people are patting you on the back, cheering for you, high-fiving you when you do something hard and you achieve it, it's absolutely a rush. And it's good for your brain. You're releasing, endorphins, dopamine, oxytocin. You're doing all these good things in addition to the healthy exercise. And that's feeding into that. So it's vitally important. And those are the fitness things that actually get that part right.
Great. Thank you. Gonna have a couple of the audience members ask you a question. Patrick T, please state where you're from and ask your question. Patrick?
Hello. Hi, Derek. Thank you for your presentation. I'm from the Netherlands. My question is, what exercise do you advise to train your core?
Great question. I'm I won't say I'm lazy, but with my own training, I try to integrate core into other exercises because I don't have a lot of time and I don't want to spend a lot of time on core in particular. Um, I like a lot of hanging leg raises. For example, I can integrate those with push-ups or L-sits or dips. L-sits are another good one. I like a lot of planks and side planks, and you can do a lot of exercises from a plank position. With my clients, I tend to focus on some sort of hollow hold. So like a dead bug, a hollow hold, things like that. If you're familiar with these terms, they really emphasize lumbopelvic stability, trying to take that arch out of your lower back and engage your core instead. I focus on that and a lot of side planks because those correlate with less back problems, stronger core. And the primary function of the core musculature is stability more necessarily than dynamic movement, although it can do both and it should. So that's where I kind of focus is stability exercises.
And how do we undo sitting all day?
There's a great text by Dr. Stuart McGill. He's the lower back guy. Um, lower back pain is absolutely an epidemic in our society, and it's because of chairs. Chairs are one of the worst inventions humans have ever come up with, and there's a long list of bad inventions. Um, the short answer is get up often. It is much better to sit all day, but get up every 20, 30 minutes than it is to sit all day without getting up at all. That makes a massive difference. It's, did you have a follow-up question? Sorry. Well, anyway,
No, go ahead.
sure. What I was going to say is the muscles along our spine, the muscles that stabilize our core, are designed to be active all day long, 100% of the time, unless we're asleep. That's how they've evolved. That's what they're designed to do. In a chair with a backrest, as soon as we start slouching, those muscles are allowed to completely relax. And that's not something they've ever done for the history of humankind, except unless we're asleep. So they're designed to have a very low workload all day long with occasional bouts of intense workload. That's how they're supposed to function. And they're just not designed to be relaxed for long stretches of time at all. They're always supposed to be engaged. And so, the evidence is pretty clear that even if you're working out a couple days a week, your risk of lower back injury is just as high if you have a sedentary job as someone who doesn't work out at all. So really interrupting those long bouts of sitting or using something where you have to engage your core like a stand-up desk is really, really beneficial for lower back pain.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had a question come in. What do you eat all day? What do you eat in a day? And what is your macronutrient ratios? And this is somebody. This is actually from John, who is behind the scenes here at The Real Truth About Health, and he's extremely into working out, and he loved your presentation.
Oh,
so.
Glad he loved it. Hi, John. He's taking notes. Okay, good. Granted, I've not competed in bodybuilding since 2017, 2018, so I'm a little out of it. And I mentioned I have 3 kids, so I'm just kind of surviving at this point. But typical breakfast for me, like what I ate this morning, big bowl of oatmeal, lots of fruit. Typical lunch is either leftovers from dinner because that's easy. Or my go-to is a great big salad, half a block of tofu. I like to sear the tofu in the pan, put tons of veggies on it, balsamic vinegar, so it's pretty low fat, and then a baked potato or something like that on the side. Sometimes I'll throw in banana ice cream afterwards. And then if you've read any of my stuff, especially from earlier years, I invented a smoothie with beans in it called a bean shake. That's one of my claims to fame when I was looking to bulk up with whole foods. That was one of the ways I got my protein and calories way up. And so I still have one of those almost every single afternoon, and it has all the superfoods in it. I put turmeric in it. I put, beet in it. I put black beans, lots of berries, flax meal, all the stuff. It's basically Dr. Greger's Daily Dozen in a blender. So I have that every afternoon. And then dinner is, generally some kind of like whole grain pasta or beans and rice dish or some kind of ethnic food. Like we love Thai food, we love Indian food. So that's typically what I'm eating in a day. I will oftentimes after strength training have a protein shake. But that's just about the only protein I ever supplement, whereas I used to have multiple shakes a day. I definitely don't do that now. I don't even have one every day. And macronutrient ratio, I don't look at ratios. That's the percentage of calories. I look at actual grams. And I'm not really measuring them right now, but when I last was, I was shooting for 120 grams of protein a day, which at my weight, I'm just under 200 pounds. And then I typically have 25% of calories from fat, which I think comes out to 75 or something. And then the remainder from carbs, which is probably 600 grams or don't quote my numbers on that. I'd have to get a calculator out. I have not tracked them in a minute, but hopefully when I get back into bodybuilding, when my toddler is not a toddler anymore and not toddling me in the middle of the night, hopefully when I get back to bodybuilding, I will have a much better clench on those numbers and I'll give you a better answer.
All right. Well, we'll have to have John reach out to you at that time. So you mentioned your recipe for your bean shake, right? I think you need a better marketing department on the name for that. But where would someone find out the recipe? I'm sure the audience would love to check that out.
Sure. It's actually on our website, which is veganmuscleandfitness.com. There's it's a post I put on it with the recipe, and I believe it's called plant-based protein super shake. So if you Google that, or if you Google Derek Tresize bean shake, I have shared many versions of the recipe over time. I think that's the most current one from a few years ago. So it would be plant-based protein super shake. And that shows it's actually kind of a blueprint because it's not just the recipe. It's if you're looking to gain weight, add these things. If you're looking to lose weight, add these things. It gives you some options and some framework. But essentially it's fruit, leafy green vegetables, some nuts and seeds, and beans are the foundation. And I add some other things in there to make it more nutritious or to increase or decrease the calories based on my goals.
Great. Thank you. And I'm going to ask a question on behalf of one of our audience members, Tamara K. I don't know if this is in your area of expertise, but they ask, why would a man who is very active every day for many years, such as Taekwondo, various exercises, biking, etc., have cramps in their thighs when they stand? And how do you fix this so it doesn't happen? How do you relieve the cramps in the thighs?
Sure. The cramps are generally going to be from one of three things. The first thing is dehydration, and I'm guessing someone who's health conscious and very active is getting plenty of water. But that's the lowest hanging fruit. If you're getting cramps, the first thing to assess is, am I dehydrated? Second thing is mineral balance. So muscles can require sodium, potassium, and calcium to contract. And if those are too far out of whack, generally it's potassium or calcium. We all get enough sodium. If those things are too far out of alignment, that can interfere with muscle contraction. That can cause cramps. Magnesium can help as well, but that's less critical unless you're very deficient. The third thing, though, is actually muscle imbalances. And that's something that I work with more is if you're getting lots of cramps in your thighs, it's probably that your thighs are overworking because something else is being compensated for. So let's say it's your quadriceps on the front of your thighs. My guess, if I were to have to guess, is that you need to strengthen your hamstring muscles or your glute muscles on the other side of the leg. Because not only is it that muscles have to compensate for other muscles that aren't pulling their own weight, so to speak, it's that the neurology of your muscles dictates when they relax and when they contract. If you contract one muscle, it sends a similar signal to the opposite muscle to relax, so they're not fighting each other. That's called reciprocal inhibition. So if you have really, really weak hamstring muscles, for example, that are never contracting, they're also never sending that reciprocal inhibition signal to your quadricep muscle on the other side to relax. So if your quadriceps are giving you tons and tons and tons of problems, it might be the hamstring is never sending that signal to say, hey, calm down. And so that's probably where I would look. If your minerals are in place and if your hydration is where it needs to be, I would assess what other muscles around are not doing their job, not sending that signal that's going to help those cramping muscles to relax. And my guess is you start working those and you'll see pretty immediate relief within a couple weeks.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned or suggested that people may consider getting a trainer to help with motivation and improve their workouts. How do we ensure we have a qualified trainer? What do we look for? And more specifically, how do we know a trainer is right for us?
Gotcha. The most important metric I would look for in a trainer is experience. There's a lot of great personal trainer certifications out there, nationally accredited ones. I could rattle off a few if you guys are interested, but I'm not gonna. You can look that up pretty easily with a Google search. There's also 4-year degrees. If you have a degree in exercise science, a degree in kinesiology, that certainly helps, in biomechanics. This means you have a lot of book smart, so to speak. But I find I've learned so much from seeing 10,000 people squat 10,000 times. I've seen every possible way you can do a squat, and that makes it very easy for me to assess what's going on and how to fix it. So I think experience is really, really useful, especially experience with people like you. If you have a double knee replacement, see if a trainer's ever worked with anyone with a joint replacement. If you are an older female, make sure your trainer has worked with an older female before. Make sure that they have specific experience to you, because then they're going to be more well suited to deal with whatever issues you have or to address the goals that you're looking to achieve. And then seeing if a trainer is a good fit, that's just personalities. And it's especially early on in my career, it was kind of hard when a client and I didn't mesh, but it's absolutely normal. That same with a hairdresser, same with anything. Sometimes you work with people and you just don't click, and it's absolutely fine. It's not anyone's fault. They might want a cheerleader, whereas you're a drill sergeant, or they might want someone who's calm and collected, whereas you're, very, very animated. So if you try someone, it's not a good fit, don't feel bad about it. Be like, hey, I like it. You know lots of stuff. I think you're doing a great job, but I'm going to try someone else and just see if we have a little more rapport. No big deal. So those are my suggestions. Look for someone with experience and then just give them a shot, and, hopefully it clicks and you're off and running.
And you mentioned that your gym is a plant-based gym, and meaning that all of your trainers are whole food plant-based. How does being whole food plant-based inform your training with your customers?
The major way, obviously, is nutritional recommendations. So someone brings me a food journal or someone asks me nutrition questions, I'm going to then guide them to the most whole food plant-based option or direction that I can get that person into. There's some people that are steadfast against it, which is, that's their problem, whatever. They say, I just hired you for the exercise. I'm okay, that's fine. I'm still going to nudge you. And there's some people who are there to learn, and that's great. I try not to bang my head against a wall, and I try to really help the people that are open to being helped in that regard. But it's informing my suggestions in terms of not necessarily exercise. Everyone benefits from the same style of programs based on their goals. But someone who's following a really good diet is probably going to be able to recover faster and make quicker progress. And so I'm going to spread that information. And I'm also going to recommend, if you, let's say you just had a heavy night of drinking, make sure you're getting lots of fruit for antioxidants and things like that. I'm going to have specific things based on the things they tell me that are whole food plant-based, rather than like, just go to have an emergency packet of, vitamin C supplement or something. I would say have some oranges. So it's very much informs me in a subtle way in that regard. I can give advice or nudge or feedback that's pointing people in the whole food option of whatever their situation is.
And along the same lines, you went through Dr. T. Colin Campbell's plant-based nutrition course, and you're certified through that. What is something that you learned that helped inform what you do in your own life and something that you share with your clients.
Sure. That, and I was already on that journey to some extent, but it really informed how unnecessary and how suspect almost all dietary supplements are. That was a big one. I mentioned early on in my bodybuilding career, I was taking tons of protein shakes, I was taking tons of pills and powders and potions because I thought you had to. The marketing departments for all those companies is very powerful and compelling. Um, and I was already kind of stepping away from that and realizing that was not a sustainable way to do things. But the T. Colin Campbell certification really opened my eyes to, there's research showing that you don't need these things at all. The results are absolutely similar without them. There's research that they are very untrustworthy. So if you do supplement, you want to make sure you get third-party tested, good manufacturing certified, things like that. But you don't need to. Save your money, eat whole plant foods, and you can optimize your results. That's something I definitely talk about with my clients and something I took away from that course. But there was a lot. It was a great course and I really enjoyed it.
Great. And I appreciate that. That was actually going to be my next question was on supplementation. Are there any supplements that you do take and that you would recommend to others? Have you noticed any changes since you stopped supplementation, and what did you used to take that you stopped?
The second question, something I noticed is I used to be big on pre-workouts. If you're not familiar with pre-workouts, it's kind of a cocktail of supplements that are supposed to ensure you have a good, hard, productive workout. Usually it's just lots of caffeine and some other things. I used to love taking one of those. This is before I had kids, not surprisingly. I'd get up morning, I'd lift weights at 6 a.m., take a scoop of that, and I'd just, charge in the gym all overstimulated, have a really hard workout, feel great, and then, shower off and go to work and start my day. I've definitely moved away from those. I think those, in addition to being unhealthy and being questionable in terms of their ingredients, kind of fry your nerves over time, if that makes sense. You're just always hyped up, over caffeinated. You beat yourself up in the gym. It takes longer to recover. So I don't think that's necessarily the best approach. Um, and it's also not appealing to me now. Like I have too many balls in the air. If I'm going to work out now, it's just whenever I can fit it in 30 or 45 minutes rather than this perfect 90-minute beginning of the day session I used to have. So that has been a different approach. In terms of supplements I would actually recommend, there absolutely is one. I would say creatine monohydrate. And some people might argue with me on this one, but creatine monohydrate, for those who don't know, it's it's a muscle or it's a molecule our muscles already make and store for very quick release energy. So like glycogen is stored carbohydrate for if you're doing endurance exercise. Creatine monohydrate is that analog, but for very short, like sprinting or like lifting a very heavy weight a couple of times, fuel for our muscles. It's stored really rapid energy. And it's been known for 30, 40 years now that creatine improves muscle performance. You will get a little bit faster, you will get a little bit stronger, and you will gain muscle a little more quickly because of this if you supplement with creatine. It's also been demonstrated to be very, very safe. There's a good amount of data on it that it's not doesn't have any negative repercussions. What's new is in the last probably only 6 or 8 years, or less than that, people have been studying what other systems it impacts. And it turns out there's a whole host of bodily systems that creatine looks to benefit. It's benefiting your brain and being neuroprotective if you are sleep deprived, or if you have neurodegenerative diseases, it's protective against those. It's protective against autoimmune disease. It's improving glucose metabolism and lipid profiling, so it makes you less likely to contract diabetes and things like that. So granted, it's never in science, if you really approach it open mind, it's never a closed story. There's always more to learn. But the way things look right now is that creatine is safe, effective for strength resistance training, building muscle, losing body fat, and is going to benefit the rest of your body as well. That's the way the research is currently pointing. So if you wanted to supplement, in addition to say like a multivitamin or something covering your nutritional basis, that would be one that I would say, make sure it's third-party tested, make sure it's good manufacturing certified, because you cannot trust the supplement industry as far as you could throw it. But if it's third-party tested and all that, then that would might be one to try and see how it goes. You certainly don't have to, though. You can achieve great results. You can maintain your body and achieve optimal health with whole foods, and that's the way it's always been done. So don't feel obligated there. The other things are kind of obvious, like vitamin D, especially if you don't get a lot of sunshine on bare skin, if you live in northern latitudes. Essential fats are important, although I kind of just tend to lean on walnuts and flax meal for that. Maybe I'm missing something, but I feel fine about it. And vitamin B12, which if you're eating any amount of fortified foods or if you're supplementing the multivitamin, you don't even need to worry about. So that should answer that question, hopefully. But again, whole foods are the foundation of any good practice.
Great, thank you. And what are your thoughts on protein isolates? Pea protein isolates are very popular, in these protein drinks, as well as some vegan foods. So, what are your thoughts? Are they okay? Are they not so okay?
Well, let's say if you were looking to supplement protein powder, I definitely think a plant protein is going to be better than an animal-based protein option. So if you're already planning on supplementing, that's the best choice to have. It's never going to be as good as whole food though, because it's an isolated, refined packaged food compared to a whole intact food. It's not going to have any fiber. It's not going to have the vitamins and minerals. It's not going to have any healthy fats. So right away, you are losing a lot of nutritional balance when you're having a processed food like that. Is there a place for it? You could make a place for it. Let's say you were very serious about training, strength training in particular, and you wanted to maximize your recovery and make it easier to hit the higher end of those protein targets I was talking about earlier. That's going to facilitate doing that. And I have read studies that show if you supplement with a protein powder post workout, you do have slightly faster muscle recovery. Um, it, if you're eating the same amount of protein, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to gain more if someone's having protein supplements and someone's just eating more whole food protein. If they're eating the same total amount of protein, they're going to have probably the same results. That seems to be the consensus so far, is the amount of protein you eat total is what matters. But it's convenient, and especially like in someone in my situation, let's say I'm starting to diet for a bodybuilding competition. My goal is to have a pretty high protein intake, the top of that healthy range. And I'm starting to cut calories and reduce body fat. Having a protein shake is going to make it easier to hit that protein target, which is going to then open up my calories to eat other food options. So if you are someone who's in a very specific situation where you're trying to restrict calories, and hit a protein target, compared to eating, for example, beans and tofu, that might, towards the end of a bodybuilding diet, be all I can eat because of the calories it takes to get the protein I'm after. If I were to supplement with protein, I've I've checked that box of some of the protein I'm taking in, and that leaves more caloric space in my budget to eat something like fruit or a sweet potato or something that's very nutritious that I wouldn't get in otherwise. So in that regard as well, I think protein powder can have its place and lend to a healthy diet, but that's a very specific situation. By and large, someone who's just looking to get fit, it can help your recovery a little bit, but I think it's ultimately unnecessary, and it's a processed food, which you also always want to be careful of.
Right. And what are some of the most common misconceptions about being whole food plant-based and bodybuilding that you encounter, and how do you address those misconceptions?
I don't see as many of those as I used to, honestly. When I started bodybuilding in 2011, people were just shocked. They had no idea. Like many people didn't even know what vegan meant, which is fair. I didn't when I first transitioned. But nowadays, it's so mainstream, so commonplace, and enough people have seen films like Game Changers or heard about athletes trying a vegan diet that there are a lot less of those conversations, which is refreshing. I'm glad so many people are more informed than they used to be. Misconceptions are still generally around protein, around eating enough, around carbs as well, especially because the low carb dogma tends to really be persistent. I don't know why. But people are like, how on earth do you not eat carbs if you're on a vegan diet and all you can eat is carbs? It's like, I eat carbs and I do great and I love it. It's wonderful. Um, so those tend to be the two things. And my answer for proteins is the same that I just gave you guys a minute ago. It's focus on beans, focus on nuts and seeds, focus on tofu and tempeh. Granted, those aren't pure protein the way a skinless chicken breast is, but they're much higher in protein than most other plant foods. And in terms of carbohydrates, how I address that question is my metabolism sped up when I became plant-based. I noticed I lost body fat and I had to eat more food to maintain my weight than I used to. And that's still the case. It is easy for me to reduce it, yay carbs. It's easy for me to reduce body fat while still eating a good amount of carbs. I'm still lowering my total calories, but in competing with Team Plant Built, which is a team of plant-based bodybuilders and strength athletes, they all pretty much say the same thing, is they are able to maintain a much higher carb intake while they're dieting, even though they're still cutting calories, than they used to as omnivores or than our omnivore counterparts can. You go behind stage at a bodybuilding show where everyone's been dieting for 3 or 4 months and they're zombies. Whereas the vegans are chipper. We're chatting. We're feeling good. I'm hungry. Yeah, I want to go ice cream after the show, but I'm not at death's door. And that's a big difference. So, you're eating healthy foods and your body is more responsive to these things.
So one of the things that people have been scared of, I think somewhat culturally, is the idea that soy is bad for you. It has the phytoestrogens. Do you encounter that? And what are your thoughts on soy?
I still encounter that a little bit. And in fact, I think it's a shame because you see less soy milk in the grocery stores than you used to. You see less soy milk at cafes as a milk alternative than you used to. And I think it's because of that fear mongering, which is too bad because soy milk is absolutely healthy. Soy in general, it's a great source of protein if you're on the hunt for protein. It's got omega-3 fats. It's got lots of minerals and calcium. It's a good amount of fiber. So it's a very, very healthy food. In terms of the phytoestrogens in particular, I always have to ask, my follow-up to someone who talks to me is that, like, why soy in particular? There are many plants that have phytoestrogens. Animals have hormones, including estrogen. Plants also have hormones, including estrogen. Why is everyone so focused on soy? And yes, it does have more phytoestrogens than a lot of plants, but nobody's focusing on red kidney beans or flax seeds. Those also have a lot of phytoestrogens. So why? And my only rational idea that I can come up with and answer that question is that it's competitive for the dairy industry. So, or that in particular, but meat in general, is that soy is under a lot of scrutiny, and so they're grasping at straws of what might be wrong with it as phytoestrogens, whereas nobody's worried about flax meal. Flax meal is not going to muscle out dairy milk at the grocery store counter, so there's no scrutiny there. But I also would say, okay, so yes, absolutely, soy does have this phytoestrogen. What does that do to us? Like, let's not just be knee-jerk frightened of the word estrogen. And what it does is it competitively inhibits our own estrogen. So we have estrogen receptors on our cells that our own estrogen circulating in our blood will bind to and cause changes in the cells that it binds to. Soy estrogen will also bind to the same receptors and block them from our estrogen. So it's competitive inhibition. It's gumming up the lock for the other one. And what that means is that we have a net reduction in our own estrogen signal. And instead, we're having this weaker plant estrogen signal. So it's almost like a net reduction in estrogen, even though we're consuming all this soy. And you can see studies, men who have the most soy intake have on average slightly higher testosterone than the men who don't. You can see reproductive cancers in particular, prostate, testicular cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer are lower in people who eat the most soy compared to people who eat more soy. And that's because it's buffering our own estrogen. And the last thing I like to ask for people who are really worried about soy is, okay, so you're avoiding soy because of estrogen, but you're having dairy milk. Dairy milk actually has far more estrogen than something like soy milk, and it's bovine estrogen. So what's going to have a bigger impact on our tissue, on our cells, and on our estrogen load? A plant estrogen, if we know is weaker, or bovine estrogen? And the answer is pretty straightforward. The cow estrogen is much more potent, and that's why dairy products in particular see a increased risk in reproductive cancers the more you consume. Is that same exact equation I talked about with soy, but in reverse.
Okay, thank you. And one of our participants is asking about plantar fasciitis and wants to know if they can still do balance exercises with bare feet. Their doctor tells them that they should always be wearing shoes. What are your thoughts?
Well, one, I hate shoes, so I'm biased. I want you to have really strong, healthy feet. But if you're in chronic pain, like plantar fasciitis can get very bad. If it's a mild case where you're like, ooh, when I get up in the morning, my heels are sore, no big deal. Try and build it up and improve it. But if you've had it for years and it just kills you to walk on it and you cannot walk without shoes, that's going to take some work to get out of that situation. I will tell you, your doctor's advice of only ever wear shoes, only ever have arch support, only ever have ankle support is going to lock you into plantar fasciitis for the rest of your life. You're going to be trapped in those shoes because a quarter of our joints and a ton of muscles are in our feet, and those are all weak and atrophied. And they're going to get more and more weak and atrophied the more support and cushioning you give them. That's how that works. And so our body adapts based on what the stress we put it on. Balancing exercise barefoot, I would absolutely say that should be fine. The worst thing about plantar fasciitis is impact. So if you were to go out and run, or if you were to hop on the trampoline, like I mentioned, or do plyometrics, that would not be a good idea. That would be painful. But just standing barefoot, start with small loads, like maybe do 2 sets of 10 seconds per foot, leave it, wait 2 days, see what happens, and then build up from there. But I absolutely think you should be able to strengthen your feet. There's two typical causes of plantar fasciitis, and I don't want to take too much time from anyone else that has questions, but two typical causes. One is the plantar fascia is the fascia at the bottom of your foot, and it runs all the way up the back of your body, actually to the crown of your skull. So things along that chain of muscles can be overly tight, and they can be causing extra pressure in that plantar fascia. So make sure your hips and glutes are flexible. Make sure your hamstrings are flexible. Make sure your lower back and everything is flexible. Work on flexibility all the way up that chain of the back of your body, and that will take pressure off of your plantar fascia, and it sometimes heal from that. The other thing is make sure you're spreading your toes. And this is another reason I hate shoes, is they scrunch your toes together. There is an artery that runs along your big toe that if you push your big toe up and in, the way most shoes do, and scrunch them together, you're pinching off blood flow to the arch of your foot. And so you might actually not have plantar fascia from being overly muscularly tight. You might have plantar fasciitis from having degeneration due to lack of blood flow to the arch of your foot. So being barefoot, allowing your toes to spread out, or even better, getting like toe spreaders and stretching your toes out, will increase circulation to the arch of your foot and can aid in healing. So definitely work on being barefoot, get out of the shoes. And then if you can, build up how long you can balance on that foot. And hopefully we can get you out of being trapped in those shoes, because we want you to have strong feet.
And what are your thoughts on yoga for fitness?
Yoga for fitness. I think yoga is fantastic. The things that concern me about yoga is getting into really aggressive stretch positions, like really trying to maximize your range of motion. That makes me nervous. I've seen enough people with tweaked lower back, tweaked hips, and pulled hamstrings, things like that. I think yoga really shines, actually, and this might be counterintuitive to a lot of people, is in mental health. Breath work, like meditative breath work, being present, being mindful, is really good for your lowering stress and just generally less chronic fatigue, things like that. And the combination of going through poses in a rhythm to slow controlled breathing is actually wonderful. If you get, I'm going to mispronounce it, but Shavasana at the end, the position where you're lying down, by the time you get there, you're so relaxed and you're so sleepy. It's because you've gone completely parasympathetic. That movement combined with that slow controlled breathing has lowered your stress level through the floor. And so you feel really relaxed. And I think that is really healthy in terms of recovery, in terms of digestion, in terms of your immune system. So that part of yoga is my absolute favorite. And I want you to go and do that. Just be careful not to go really aggressive on the deep stretches. Those make me nervous.
Thank you very much. And we have about a minute left. So if you want to leave anyone with final thoughts on how they could begin their journey or do so safely, or anything you want to say.
Absolutely. We're learning more all the time about a lot of how these things are benefiting us. The clear picture that I'm seeing more and more is strength train. It's very important. It's going to improve every aspect of your body, even things you never even thought of, like brain health or like diabetes risk. Strength train. We're now learning more and more that power in particular is, your muscles' ability to contract quickly, contract with force. It may be even more important than just strength training in general. So strength train mindfully, focus on what you're doing, do less, but do it better. And everyone can start. There's no reason you can't do it. Even if you're in a wheelchair and you can only use your upper body, even if you're like in that one study above 85 years old, everyone will benefit. So do something, get started. It's just like a plant-based diet. Just try it, feel the results, give yourself 6 or 8 weeks for your body to adapt and see what happens, because there's no downside and there's tremendous upside.
Great. Derek, thank you so much for all the information you shared with us today. If we could unmute the audience so they could share their appreciation for Derek, please.
Happened, Vandenberg,
Thank
died in
you, Derek.
1950,
Thank
come up
you.
with
Thank you everyone so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this.
investigation.
Thank you.